Okay, everyone, welcome to national security. But we are in the middle of the Ukraine crisis. So it goes without saying that this is going to be a huge part of this class. Now, this is what makes it interesting. Although I, Dr. Charles G. Ripley, focus on Latin America, that's my research area, there is a lot more going on in national security than that. Now, I always, as you'll see, or if you've had me before, I have the photos behind me. I always take a picture. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, I'm not a Russian expert, right? So I don't have photos. And then I thought, wait a minute, I was actually in Cartagena, Colombia, at a Russian bar, because I go to bars in Latin America, right? That, as you can see, let's take a look, is what behind me is a photo I took at this Russian bar. And it is absolutely amazing that Putin is in this, what would we say, cuadro in Spanish, this painting. You've got Karl Marx, Lenin, who's that other guy? Is that Engels? And then you've got Stalin. And then you've got, yes, Vladimir Putin. And I find that so interesting. This was back, I want to say in 2021, 2020, around there, when I was doing a presentation, a congreso, in the Universidad del Norte, the University of the North, in Barranquilla, Colombia. And it's right near Cartagena, which is a big castle, which you're going to see something on that as well. Do walls and these fortifications work? But more importantly, they had Putin painted in this with the big leaders, the strongmen, the caudillos, if you're from Latin America, whatever, of Russia. Obviously not Karl Marx, but you have Stalin, Lenin, and Putin. It's very interesting. So I said that will be the background. Now, when you're looking at the Ukraine crisis, right, even though this is the introduction, we're just going to jump right into it. If your debates are on the Ukraine crisis, you have to choose a debate. You upload it on YouTube, or you can send it to me individually, or you can, upload it on something else, but the students should see, should NATO get involved in the Ukraine? And although I focus on Latin America, and there is a lot going on in Latin America, Africa, and elsewhere, the world has been dominated by the news. And this is lamentable as well, not just the invasion itself, but also the fact that there's still a lot of crises, which we're going to talk about: Myanmar, Eritrea, Ethiopia, all these areas of the world that are going on. Refugees still coming from Venezuela, Honduras. It's not dependent on the ideological bent of a president of Latin America, but there's a huge refugee crisis in both quote unquote socialist, capitalist countries coming to the United States of America. Nicaragua, where I lived 8 years of my life, which you're going to hear a lot about, is in a disaster right now. I was there for the 2018 protests against President Daniel Ortega, who went a little local. And what you're going to see is a lot of the stuff I do, but the Ukraine crisis is going to be a big part, because this not only focuses on, say, the United States. Obviously, it's not the United States, but a U.S. foreign policy class, but the national security of Europe in and of itself. So, should Poland be taking in so many refugees? Is there a racism involved with taking in these refugees? We're going to talk about, for example, if refugees are coming from Syria, they're not as white as the refugees coming from the Ukraine. There's actually commercials in some European countries saying, well, they're white, blue-eyed like us, we have to take them. That's going to be a big thing. But the invasion itself is so interesting on such a number of levels. The first one, obviously, is, did Putin miscalculate the resolve of the Ukrainians and the ability to take it over? Second, why did Russia invade in the first place? This is going to be a big debate. The idea there, just for to narrow it down, although it's much more complex, there are two schools of thought. One, Russia is an intrinsic expansionist power, but I would say all powers are expansionist. So is Russia doing something different than other powers. And this is going to be a debate. And two, was Russia provoked? Mearsheimer and others make this argument that by surrounding Russia with NATO, with the European Union, that it felt that it was under threat. And even if you don't believe that argument, did the expansion of NATO into Russia's backyard basically give Putin the credibility and enough support to carry out this invasion, not only there, but Chechnya and other places in support of Lukashenko and Belarus, etc. So these are things we're going to have to talk about in this class. Now, a lot of people might not buy into that, but some people will say, and I'm not giving my opinion, obviously I have my understanding of the conflict, but the idea that no, Putin is just kind of a thug and expanding for a certain interest, or did the expansion of NATO give Putin or whatever leader would be in charge of Russia the credibility to go into places like the Ukraine? And that is going to be a big debate, right? Because if, say, for example, Russia was in our backyard expanding, would we invade Latin American countries? Well, we have. So there you have it. Nicaragua, El Salvador, we took half of Mexico's land, Grenada, Haiti a number of times, basically kidnapping Aristide, obviously Cuba. We install dictators all the time. People forget Hugo Chavez of Venezuela was democratically elected. We supported a coup against him. We illegally supported a group called the Contra in Nicaragua, which we're going to talk about. So do powers do this? So the question posited here, and I'm going to love your opinions, is that is Russia doing something different than other powers, right? Because think about it, Vietnam, after it kicked out the United States, fought China, it went into Cambodia and kicked out Pol Pot and installed a puppet Vietnamese regime. So is what Putin, other side, the strongman of Russia doing, is it different from other leaders, right? That's what I want you to do. And does this kind of expansion of NATO into neighboring countries give Putin enough credibility and support to actually do these types of things? And, remember, Russia was invaded a number of times. Napoleon basically burnt down Moscow, and Stalin, who's behind me right here, over here, was on a train to Moscow in World War II because he actually thought the Nazis were going to make it to Moscow. So the question is does Russia have legitimate security concerns about the expansion of NATO and the EU? Or is it just using that as a pretext, like it is, to denazify the Ukraine? And the other issue, and we actually have a debate about this, so I am going to love listening to your arguments. Should NATO be doing more? Meaning maybe no-fly zones, literally taking out Russian armaments. They have long convoys, which are easily, they would be easy targets for NATO. NATO was using Afghanistan, Libya, etc. So the question becomes, should NATO do more? Should the United States do more? Or should the United States not do anything, right? Or do less because we have, we're spending a lot of money now sending it to the Ukraine when we have problems at home, and this is basically a European problem. The argument is Germany, France, and other European powers have to pay more, right? They have to contribute more to this crisis, right? It's just like the former war in Yugoslavia, where the United States had to step in with NATO to do what a lot of people argued the European Union couldn't do. And then on top of that, right, don't forget the bombing of the former Yugoslavia by the United States, 1992 to 1994, was very unpopular in Russia, but Russia was basically weak at that time. So you have to ask yourself, have we done that if Russia was strong? Because now we're basically saying we're not going to hit any of Russian tanks or any of its armament going into the Ukraine. And Putin has answered the nuclear card. Right? Oh, by the way, I'm from Boston, Massachusetts. So I say park the car, Harvard. Yeah, there are no answers. So you have to answer and pause it and think about with great foresight. it's very difficult to predict these things. I mean, I never predicted that Putin would go all the way into the Ukraine like this. I think my prediction was he would take parts of the Ukraine that are more pro-Russian, like the Crimea, which would be popular and less, let's just say, bloody. But to go in all the way like he's doing, and now there's evidence maybe he wants Moldova and Transnistria. You know, what is going on here? This is an incredible study and a lamentable study, remember, because of the human suffering. I think the last I read it was 5.5 million refugees. What do we do with this crisis? And then I'll posit even the last thing, are sanctions even working? The United States of America likes to say we're putting on sanctions, but so many other countries, India, Saudi Arabia, etc., have said we're not doing this. We can't. India said we have our own energy concerns, and the Biden administration has come out and said, wow, you know, we understand. And Europe is actually taking a lot of Russian oil. You know, there's a ways around these sanctions, even if they put on sanctions, because they're very dependent on Russia. And this also, and this is even a better thing to think about. So we're laying out all these cards right away in this introduction. This really is an introduction. It's like a lecture. Did or does economic liberalism, if you know that term, the idea that as states become more interdependent economically, the world becomes more peaceful because people are scared of war because it'll hurt their economies. Does this challenge economic liberalism and say, wow, Russia has integrated so much with oil, gas, natural gas, and other mineral wealth into the economy that it can actually invade the Ukraine because states can't put sanctions on it. So they're integrated to such an extent, states are scared to stand up to Russia and say, you shouldn't be in the Ukraine, right? Saudi Arabia, India, big countries. There's a lot of them out there that are saying, oh, well, you know, Turkey, we don't like this war, but we're not going to slap sanctions. And should the United States slap sanctions on Russia? And is it hurting us in a time of very, very high inflation? So all of these things, is there a possibility of any kind of nuclear altercation? I just throw out so many points, right? And a lot of people might say that's disorganized. This is unbelievable what's going on here, and is changing, you know, national security policy and doctrine, which is one of the things we have to talk about when we get further into the course. You know, the idea, should state on state war be more important at this in our national security doctrine? I'm thinking from the United States, but other countries. Remember, national security is a U.S. foreign policy class. You can focus on the security of all these states, you know, or should we be focusing on non-state actor terrorism, Al-Qaeda, etc.? So, you know, this is one of the big things. Should we be preparing for a clash of superpowers? You know, are we going to be, or are we in World War III? That's what's making this course so incredible. Not just me, your professor, which is very incredible. I'm just kidding. But you know what's going on now in current events. So I really want you to start thinking about this stuff now. Thinking about the debates and how we'll apply the theory. We're going to do some obviously military theory, insurgency theory, because even if the Ukraine gets taken over by Russia, just say it does, will it be facing, you know, on all fronts, a guerrilla war? And this is another important thing. So we just laid out a bunch of points on this crisis. You know, everything from sanctions. Did Putin miscalculate? Should the United States be more involved or less involved? Should NATO be more involved, bombing, or less involved? Is NATO being strengthened by this? Because as Trump used to, you know, challenge the institution of NATO, now this was probably a gift to NATO, strengthens NATO. You know, all these other countries, Finland had said, hey, you know, NATO's not a bad idea, let's join NATO. Because remember, Finland was invaded by Russia. In fact, that's where you get the Molotov cocktail from. I actually threw a couple. When they were throwing it at the Russians, where Molotov, I believe the defense minister, Minister of Interior, where they were throwing it and called it Molotov after him. And it's basically a makeshift armament where you light it in a bottle, it's of this kerosene or other things, and you throw it at the cops, and it can be very lethal. So you basically have all of these issues on the table. And people like to say, oh, this is, what Russia's doing is so abnormal. I unfortunately see it as very normal. Invading a neighbor is normal. I mean, you look at the Mexican-American War, we stole half of Mexico's land, and they would have done it to us if they probably won. You look at Vietnam, Cambodia, you look at, Costa Rica, Nicaragua. We can go through every area. Africa has a lot of land. What's going on? Kashmir, obviously. We could go on and on and on about these kinds of things. Azerbaijan crisis with Armenia. So, is this full-scale invasion that unique to national security? And my argument is no. A lot of people might say, well, now it is, but don't forget we invaded Iraq, Afghanistan. And did Putin calculate something correctly that NATO would not bomb Russian armaments and Russian military personnel? So although we're helping the Ukrainians, and will this expand into World War III and even a nuclear altercation? These are just some of the things for a pretty complex, lengthy introduction, right? But this is what this class is going to be about. And also make sure you watch that video on the extra credit points. I have a head behind me. It's not their head, although some people would like Vladimir Putin's head in that head, because that's going to be on the thing, because it's a head from warring tribes, headhunter tribes in the Amazon region of Ecuador. So without further ado, I'll leave you there with a quite an unconventional introduction to a course attributable mainly because we're living in very strange times. Maybe we always have been, but the Ukraine-Russian crisis really elevates this to a new thing. And there is no absence of lamentable crises. Remember, we have Myanmar to deal with, refugee problems and others in Latin America. We still have the Middle East. We have Saudi Arabia and the Houthis, that is in Yemen. We have a lot of state-on-state and non-state guerrilla warfare. I do a lot in Colombia. And that's where actually that picture is taken. So, I wanted to just hit you kind of with this issue and to explain to you that Ukraine is going to be important for this class. And we're going to apply a lot of theory and information that we learn in the class to it, but we'll also be expanding to a lot more other areas, as well as intelligence, etc. So it's going to be great reaching out to all of you. Please leave any questions in the community forum. And if it's of a personal nature, you can email me before the midterm exam and the final exam. We have both multiple choice questions. We're going to do a Zoom where I meet with you on Zoom at a certain time. If you can't be there, I tape it, I film it, and then I put it on the board, but I have to have students there to ask questions. But it's really good to have a great meet and greet. And if you want a recommendation in your future, you might want to say to yourself, oh, wow, we met on Zoom, etc. But if you can't make it, I understand. So then I tape it and put it on the Canvas shell. So without further ado, this is going to be quite an incredible class with what's going on in the Ukraine. So I want to say thank you for everyone coming out, and we will see a lot of you in this online course.